used by is Steve Robertson, raising a request and wanting to link an asset. Okay, so that's really all there is to asset management. However, if you're looking to expand your functionality of working with assets a little bit more within Hornbill, then we recommend you install the next app, which is Configuration Manager. Now, Configuration Manager works with asset management. It's almost an add-on. And what Configuration Manager allows you to do is have some really smart functionality when it comes to linking assets together. It also offers a few additional functions, which I'm going to go through right now with you. So the first thing to bear in mind is that Configuration Manager has a separate icon. It's a separate application altogether. So when we hover over our menu icon, you can see here we've got this grey tile which is called Configuration Manager. There's nothing else in there other than pinning it to the favourites. And if I click on this, it will take me to my in policy items screen, which I'll come back to in a moment. Now, as Configuration Manager is a separate app, it has its own tile within the admin tool. So if I go to administration, what you can see is I've actually already got this installed. So here's Hornbill Configuration Manager. You guys might not have it installed, and if you do want to install it, simply go to Add More Apps. You'll see Configuration Manager is available for you. It's free. This is a free application, so it doesn't cost any money to install. And once you've got it, you can keep it for life, or for your duration of your subscription, for free. You can just simply click the install button and then it will be on your instance. Once it's installed, if I just go back, within here you've got the ability to check some settings, to have a look at any translations against Configuration Manager, but you've also got the roles. So if we have a look at the roles, they're very similar to the Asset Manager roles. You've only got two. You've got Configuration Manager User and Configuration Management Admin. And the main difference between them is that Configuration Manager User gives you kind of a read-only view of Configuration Manager and what's in policy and the different functionality we have. Whereas the Configuration Manager Admin gives you the rights to add, edit and remove properties on the CIs. So if I just go back to the user app, Graham here has actually got the Configuration Manager admin role, so he's able to update and edit any of the CIs that we've got within Configuration Manager. Now, this in policy item screen is showing us all of the assets that are in Hornbill. You can see every single one listed there, but the difference is that a certain number of them have been marked as in policy. Now, by in policy, what we mean is that you can actually manage and control that particular asset. So, for example, if you have a number of different mice, or each of your users has got a mouse, that isn't really an asset that you need to have much maintenance over. You don't need to manage that from any perspective. It's simply an asset. It's simply a component that comes with. So for example, if you have a number of keyboards, each of those is connected to an asset. You don't need to really manage those keyboards. They're a bulk item. There needs no change control around it whatsoever. It's really just a replaceable piece of kit. Whereas if you have your Exchange server or any other server in your business, which will need any change control, if you wanted to make any amendments to this, it does need some management. That's the type of asset that we would see as being in policy. That asset is also likely to have various relationships with other assets, or other CIs as we call them. So that is something that you might choose to put in policy. Now, to put an asset in policy, you can see over here you've got the pluses and the minuses. So if I picked one to go into policy here, you can see there's my sales printer. I'm just going to simply click the plus and it turns it to a tick. Once you've done that, you've got various filters and functionality. You've got the standard quick filter up in the top left, but here we can have a quick look at which of your assets are currently in policy, which aren't in policy, and all of them. And then you can split them down. You can split them down by the class and the type. So for example, if I pick my sales printer, there we are. That's the one that's already in there. So we wouldn't expect you to have every single one of your assets in policy, just the ones that you actually want to manage on a day-to-day basis. So what does having an asset in policy actually give you? So if we actually now pop into the sales printer, so the first things that this gives is some additional functionality on your Okay, so what does having an asset in policy actually give you? So if we actually now go into the sales printer, now we put it in policy, there's a few additional functions that we can add here. So for example, we now have a timeline against this particular printer. So what we might choose to do is actually put some posts around this. So for example, if I was going to put this printer is due some maintenance, we can update that and that goes down into the timeline. Now, you might already be familiar with posts across Hornbill, but this will allow any users to collaborate with each other around this particular asset. So people can like this, people can make some comments around the posts, or people can put their own posts against the printer. This is not available if an asset is not in policy. Again, you typically wouldn't ever need to be doing this around a keyboard or a mouse or something like this. This is an option for those in policy assets which you would typically need to manage in a little bit more further detail. As well as being able to post and follow. Posting on the timeline is actually different to the history option that we mentioned earlier on. So what does having an asset in policy actually give you? So what I'm going to do to show you this is I'm going to open up the sales printer, and what you will notice is there are a number of additional options that we now have. So for example, the first one is that we have a timeline. So again, this is the type of thing where you can start collaborating around that particular asset with other users who have access to this. This is slightly different to what I showed you earlier, which was the history. Here's your history here, which shows you the differences. However, with the collaboration, you might want to put some comments or some information that other users who are interested in this asset would like to see. So for example, this needs a maintenance check. Once you update this, this is then on the timeline, and any of your colleagues or co-workers can like or comment on that particular post that you've made, or they can make their own posts. So again, this is typically for an asset that would be managed rather than a keyboard or a mouse. It's for your server, which is actually going to need to have some collaboration around an individual component. As well as being able to post on the timeline, you can also follow an asset. This is another feature you only get from putting an asset in policy. When you follow an asset, what that means is that anyone who's following it will see any updates to that asset in their notifications up at the top here. So this will allow you to keep on top of any changes. If you're the asset owner, if someone comes in and makes an amendment that you weren't expecting, you'll be notified of it. So again, it's a really useful and important feature if you have an asset that is of that importance. As well as both of these features, you also have activities. So again, you may already be used to activities in Hornbill. They are used in various different places, but a good example of activities is against an asset. So for example, I might want to actually create a weekly checklist. So I'm going to call this weekly checklist for this particular asset. I'm going to assign this task to the first line support team. And I'm going to add a checklist onto this. So I'm going to call this weekly checks, and then add a few items in. So we might have check the ink, clean the printer, and then perhaps, I don't know, something like refill paper. It's very basic checklist options we've got. And then on top of that, I'm also going to stick in a due date. So I'm going to, for my due date, I'm going to have that to be on Friday at 9 AM. You can also put a reminder in there, so anyone who's part of that team will get this particular reminder. And then you can see you've got the checks that need to be completed, and as you start completing them, if we go back here, you can see the progress bar, which shows you how far through you are. Once you've completed all of those, whoever's filling this in may want to click the complete button, put in a description, how long it took them to do, and then what you can also do is have this use this follow-up button. So what this allows you to do, if I tick it and click done, it chooses how or when to generate the next task. So I might want exactly the same task without me having to manually go and create it again, generated to be completed by in the next week. So I'm going to click follow up. And there we are. So I've got my completed task there, and then the next one, which is an exact replica, but it's got a different date, which is going for next week. So activities are really important because you can actually then start dishing out different activities, different tasks for different assets based on the asset itself. You might have a change which has different tasks, but you might actually have something which is specific to an asset that you need different organisations, users or roles to actually complete. Okay, so there's some of the features you get with putting an asset in policy. I'm just going to go back to the Configuration Manager home screen. Now, one of the key things with Configuration Manager is the relationships between assets and other areas of Hornbill. Now, in Hornbill, we actually call any asset that's been put into policy a configuration item or a CI. And we actually also consider a number of different areas as CIs as well. So they are assets, users, documents, requests, and services. So they're the 5 components we would actually class as CIs. And they can all be related to each other. Now, one of the best things you get with Configuration Manager is a visual way of representing those relationships in what we call our Graphical Explorer. I'm going to demonstrate this to you by going to a service, because services are usually underpinned by assets and other components. So if I show you the home working service, when you install Configuration Manager, what you will notice is this little icon appearing in various different components, those ones I've just mentioned. And what this allows you to do is launch the Explorer from that particular CI. It opens a new tab and it gives you this graphical interface which shows you the links between the service, the route that you've just picked, and not just the assets but all of those components I just mentioned. So as you can see here, we've got a couple of links or relationships between this service and a few of our assets here. We've got a VPN gateway there, and we've got a VPN client. Looking at this, if I zoom out and zoom back in again, we've got links to 5 incidents, a change and a problem that are all currently outstanding at the moment against that particular service. And then on top of that, we can go in even deeper and we can have a look at the relationships between this asset just by expanding that out. So you can see this asset actually is linked to another 4 assets, and we can see some of the relationship types between the two. Now, this graphical interface is configured by your system settings. So if I go back to the admin tool very quickly, in Configuration Manager, we've got some settings specific to Configuration Manager. You can see you can have different levels or different numbers of levels that display on your Graphical Explorer. We've chosen 3 because it works quite well. In theory, these could keep going on an infinite basis, because it could just keep looping back to the service, if you see what I mean, and going backwards and backwards and backwards. So you do want to just keep that in mind to not make this too big, because you can get lost quite easily. But you can expand that from 3 levels to any more if you want. If you wanted to quickly set the route as something else, we do have an option for that as well. So for example, if I clicked on this particular, actually let's choose this VPN gateway. If I click this option here, it will make the current node that I've selected the route. And then you just see the links or the relationships from that to the other assets, and then you've got another layer we can expand here. You can actually see Steve is linked as a relationship between this particular laptop, so he's the owner there. So, so that's a nice way of representing the relationships in Hornbill. On top of this, you've got the ability to actually define those relationships. So you can see here, if I was wanted to set the relationship between this gateway and this this iMac here, if I click the Not Set button, we can choose the type of dependency, and again, you can actually configure these items in a list in the system settings. So I'm going to just choose a connected to again, and the impact between those that relationship, I should say. So let's say that's a medium one, and based on what you click, that will actually set the colour. So it obviously says what the type of relationship is and also set the colour. So we have green for a low impact, red for a high impact, and the amber for the medium impact. And you can do that both ways round. I'm just going to go for connected to again. So there we go. Now, once you've actually started setting up some of your relationships, you can start filtering. So we can just filter this by the high impact relationships. So you can kind of see there, this is only showing me ones which have a high impact. You might want to filter it just by the assets that you've got in policy. I've got a few there which are showing in policy. Or you can actually even divide it by the type of CI. So if I only wanted to show assets, for example, I would remove all of the other ones, and this would just literally show me the asset links between each other. If I wanted to include a user as well, you can see Steve gets added. So you can really filter this up and down based on what you want to see on your graphical interface. You've also got a few other options along the top here to show a legend, which kind of gives you some information about what we're actually seeing on the screen here, and you can expand the canvas as well by hiding and showing the details. Now, where this comes in useful specifically is when you're kind of doing change management or problem management or release management, to have a look at the impact between the related assets or configuration items within your system. If you were scheduling a change and you knew it could potentially have some impact on your user base, you can come here, have a look at that particular asset, if it's underpinning any services, if those services went down, what else would be affected by that. And that could help you out with the scheduling and the testing and the risk assessment of any change requests that you have. This is still at quite a low level. We haven't had this app for too long, so we are going to be building some additional features into this. For example, some type of availability management or blackout periods that we can set against the assets, which would signify to particular users who are raising, let's say, change requests, if they scheduled it at a time an asset was actually had a blackout period, it would give them a warning. So we want to incorporate a few additional areas like that. But what we're really after is for you guys to begin using this, feedback any opinions you have, and also especially feedback any features you might like to see as part of this, because we would really be interested in expanding this and making it even better for you. But hopefully what we've seen today gives you a good insight into asset management and configuration management in Hornbill. Well, as I mentioned at the very start, if you do have any questions, the first place to go, especially if they are in relation to any of the ways of getting assets into Hornbill, specifically the CSV import and the SQL import, or an import from a SQL database, go onto the wiki and have a look at our wiki pages, because they are very detailed about how you do that. But if you do have any other further information that you would like to ask us or give your opinion on, then please head to the forums, and either myself, one of my colleagues, or maybe even one of the Hornbill user community will certainly get back in touch with you and be able to give you the advice that's required. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for joining today. I hope it's been of use, and I hope to see a few more of you attending a few more webinars shortly. Thanks very much. Cheers. Goodbye.